Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It's Thursday, December 20th, and I'm sitting down to answer a few questions about the outer planets that I've received. Now, I've received these questions over the past couple of weeks, and I just wanted to take a quick minute to try to address them. They're really good questions, difficult to answer, but here they are. One is, do outer planets symbolize the unconscious, and the inner planets the more everyday or sort of mundane aspects of our lives? The other one was, are the outer planets more transpersonal than, say, the inner planets? Okay, that's the first question. Short answer is no, not in my opinion. There is no planet that has the market cornered on the unconscious, no group of planets that has the market cornered on the unconscious, and there are no planets that are more transpersonal, really, than any others. In some ways, the category of the outer planets as transpersonal is set up specifically by modern astrologers who believe that the discovery of the outer planets in this day and age is a marker of progress and evolution of the field of astrology itself. And that only now are human beings really interested in the depths of the unconscious and of transpersonal reality. And ancient astrologers were really just kind of more concerned with mundane things and not as interested in the unconscious or the transpersonal reality. So insofar as some modern astrologers have that attitude, I think it's especially problematic, because when you really look at the cosmology of the ancient astrologers, and you really understand their understanding of divinity and the planets, then you'll understand that all of the planets for thousands of years have been looked at in terms of what people now would call a transpersonal dimension. The planets have always been thought of as emissaries of the gods and as representing what we would now describe as transpersonal dimensions of consciousness or of reality. So, simple answer is no. The outer planets are not anymore about the unconscious or the transpersonal or transrational or whatever than any other planet. Any planet can speak to the depths of the unconscious. Any planet or any symbol in any divinatory language, whether it's tarot or the I Ching or astrology, any symbol can speak to very ordinary everyday things like, should I buy this used car or not? Or it can speak to things like very deep psychological processes or religious and spiritual experiences. So any planet, depending on why we're approaching the language of astrology, why we're approaching the omen of the sky, the omens of the sky, can speak to us about extraordinarily deep things or extraordinarily common sort of earthly things. It depends on who's asking. It depends on what's being asked. It depends on the consciousness of the person asking. It depends on the consciousness of the reader. But my belief is that there is no categorical distinction between the planets that meaningfully that could, where one planet could be said to be transpersonal and another more mundane. So that's my answer to that question. Do they represent the unconsciousness? Well, you have to remember that the concept of the unconscious is also very new. People like Jean Gebser, people like James Hillman, and others have done a lot to actually really question the existence of the unconscious. What do we mean by that, right? So I'm going to pull up a quote. Here we go. Hold on just a second. I thought I had it pulled up, and here it is. This is from Jean Gebser, who wrote The Ever-Present Origin. My friend Jeremy Johnson actually just wrote a book about Gebser you might want to check out. He said, there is no so-called unconscious. There are only various modalities or intensities of consciousness. He goes on a little bit, but that's very important. That is also closer to what different ancient mystical traditions would tell us. There is no traditional concept of the unconscious in different mystical, whether it's yoga or Buddhism, or there's no thing called the unconscious. Similarly, Hillman wrote this. How does this term help us now? Already in Jung's usage, the term was becoming inadequate. He had to speak of a consciousness in the unconscious, and he ascribed to the unconscious a superior guiding intentionality, which is more fitting to divinities than to subliminal mental processes. By questioning the term, we do not doubt the existence of unwilled and unreasonable psychic states, of dreaming, and of subliminal creative activities, or of any of the disturbances that are called the psychopathology of everyday life. Nor do we question their inferiority as subforms of consciousness as we now conceive consciousness. He also wrote this. The term unconscious is suitable for describing states where consciousness is not present, for instance. But to use the word for the imaginal region, for morally inferior or culturally ignorant behavior, that was so unconscious. For instinctual release reactions, my unconsciousness just erupted. And for a causal agent who sends dreams and to which one can turn to ask an opinion, it was my unconscious speaking to me, is an erosion of categories. To personify it and regard it as one's own inhibitory daimonic voice, or totem animal, or familiaris, is not merely superstitious. Such habits are sacrilegious because they deprive the gods of their due. The unconscious is a concept, not a metaphor, even if what it represents is indeed the metaphorical and the source of metaphors. Thus, we seem unable to avoid speaking in this peculiar superstitious manner. But it is not good psychology to make a theology of the psyche or to psychologize the divine. So I read those. I decided to read those quotes because there's also something to me that's very troubling about ascribing planets to the unconscious, which is that in some ways it strips the planets of being gods or indicators of the gods. When the gods are real, we have a relationship with them. So, for example, sometimes someone might be programmed to sit on the couch, guzzle lots of beer, and watch boxing matches. And you or I might go like, oh, how unconscious is that? What do we really mean by that? Hillman's really challenging us rather than saying, oh, that's so unconscious, which by that we really mean, oh, some part of his, it's really kind of clinical. Oh, so some part of him is really like not functioning up to the level that it could, right? But what we miss in that kind of clinical language of the unconscious and using it to describe behavior that we don't like and behavior that we wish that he would be, this person's hypothetical person, excuse me, would be embodying, is we miss the presence of the God. In the ancient view, the gods represented, you could say, domains or spheres of consciousness. They're entities, they're living forces and powers that we have relationship with. So for example, the guy who sits on the couch, drinks lots of beer, just watches a ton of boxing, may actually be possessed by Mars, the god of war. And that kind of ancient view of the gods and consciousness, our consciousness in relation to different powers, in some ways we're whitewashing that when we say that a group of planets represents the unconscious. Because again, what we're doing is we're taking planets and we're sort of trying to bring them into a schematization that has a lot to do with the values of modern psychology, which sometimes look down upon the reality of gods and heavenly or divine forces from a kind of superior clinical intellectual position. Even if there is such a thing as the unconscious, which I personally don't believe there is, to me, what I love about ancient astrology is that it teaches us to understand what we would now call the unconscious as really a real and substantive relationship with divine agencies, with forces and spirits and other beings. Because it's a theistic worldview. It could be polytheistic or monotheistic in the old world, but it's the theistic worldview. It's a world that's, peppered with the divine. And so to me, when people say, oh, well, the new outer planets, they really cover the unconscious, and it becomes kind of clinical in that way. Not all astrologers are like that, but if it becomes like that, then I do believe, like Hillman, that we're sort of doing something that's really sacrilegious. We're not, rather than seeing the guy on the couch possessed by, a sort of a lazy Mars, we're, someone who's just guzzling beers and watching the boxing match. Instead of seeing it like that, we're being like, oh, he has bad behavior. And the old language of antiquity about Mars gives us a way of understanding his psychology, right? Like, to me, I don't like that. That, to me, I agree with Hillman that there's something sacrilegious about that. And to me, also very narcissistic. So that's my take on the piece that the reader asked about, do the outer planets represent the unconscious? When we talk about the unconscious, just sort of functionally talking about that stuff that kind of takes over our lives unconsciously, where we lose ourselves, I think functionally it's a totally appropriate word to use. I use it all the time. But when we start schematizing and saying, well, certain planets represent the unconscious, or they get more at the unconscious, again, any planet, any god, any force, any symbol in astrology can come to represent something that we are, quote unquote, unconsciously seized by or moving into a relationship with in a way where we lose some of our own agency. But that happens in romantic relationships too. That happens in everyday human experiences too. That's just a part of the way that reality works and the way that our consciousness is. We can remain sort of whole, complete, with good boundaries, or we can blend and merge with others. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. And we really have to get clear also by what we mean about the unconscious in relation to being conscious. A lot of the times when we describe the unconscious, what we're really saying is you should be conscious and you should not get possessed by other things or other people, or you should be like self-contained. And then we say you're integrated, you're whole, you're individuated, like that. And I don't know that that's always a great value either, because part of the point of reality, apparently, is to be in relationship with other things. And in consciousness, the boundaries aren't always so like whole and pure and contained and individuated and, like singular. It's not always like that. So at any rate, those are just some side thoughts. I also have a question asking, how do I use the outer planets in practice? I'm all about economy of craft. I do not use the outer planets in a first, sometimes second reading with clients. I use the traditional 7, not because I don't think they have unique value or unique contribution. I just don't, again, I don't think the outer planets have the market cornered on anything. I don't see them as being any more unique than any other planet. I sometimes say to my students, in the scope of eternity, eternity or sort of infinity is an equal opportunity employer. Like a grain of sand can speak about a grain of sand, or a planet can say something immense. And so that's something that I said in class. A student of mine wrote it down, and I thought, oh, I said that. I like that. I have to say that again. So, but that's how I feel about it, right? Like, no, it's not like, Mercury is any less important than Pluto or something like that. I'm also not allergic to the outer planets. I use them every day, mostly by transit, and in mundane horoscopes that I write for lots of people. And, but I like to read charts with fewer symbols. I don't think that the outer planets add anything to a lot of readings that the traditional 7 and the whole language of traditional astrology can't get at. For example, someone the other day had a balsamic moon in the first house, dark moon in the first house. It was conjoined with Pluto. I didn't look, and I gave them a description, and about halfway through, the person was like, "You're talking about my Pluto moon, right?" I was like, "No, I'm talking about your balsamic moon. Do you have the moon conjoined Pluto?" "Oh yeah, I totally thought that's what you're talking about." That happens a lot, actually. When you get to know the language of ancient astrology, you'll find that there are an abundance of ways of talking about the same thing. To me, this comes down to the fact that the sky uses what's available to speak to us. And the main thing are not the symbols you use, it's the divine intelligence that is speaking through them. And if you are sincere as a practitioner and you use the symbols, kind of over and over again consistently, they will become more flexible, and the sky can use them in more and more nuanced and subtle ways to speak to you. It's the same thing with tarot. You could use, you could get to know the major arcana really intimately for a while, and then slowly start adding in suited cards. Or you could use all of them at once. But over time, it's not so much that, you'll develop intimacy with the cards, right? And the cards can say things that are more specific and nuanced because you develop intimacy with them, and the sky can speak through them in more sophisticated ways. Similarly, it's not more symbols that make the delivery of the message from the skies more nuanced or comprehensive or intelligent. It's your relationship with the symbols, and it could be fewer or it could be more. I happen to use less, but that does not mean, and I happen to use them in this particular way that I'm describing, but that doesn't mean I have anything against the outer planets either. But I think that the beauty of the traditional language is that combinations of planets and phase dynamics of planets and dignities of planets and all sorts of different things, house placement, traditional house meanings, accidental dignities, a lot of the times end up saying things that the outer planets say. And I'm not suggesting that that means eliminate them, they're unnecessary. I'm just saying that that's the case. And so for that reason, because the more planets I have in my view, the more that my wheels start to turn and the less coherent I become for my clients, I tend to not use them, at least when I'm first getting to know a chart. And then maybe later I add them in. That's just me, though. I'm not suggesting dogmatically everyone has to do that or anything. I don't think you can just take away the outer planets unless you've, by the way, studied a lot of the nuances of traditional language, because I think they're best used when within a deeper grasp of a lot of different concepts and ways that they are used. So at any rate, another example for another example would be a client with Uranus in the fourth house of the father or the parents in Scorpio. That's a Mars-ruled sign. You might expect more traumatic, violent, disruptive events in the home or family, for example. One delineation possibility. In the same chart, Mars, ruler of Scorpio, is retrograde in its fall in Cancer in the 12th house. So, again, it's another case where that was another example that I wrote down for today. Almost forgot it, but I had a client where I was describing something potentially about their father through Mars retrograde in its fall in the 12th as ruler of the fourth. And they said, "You're talking about Uranus and Scorpio in the fourth, right?" Well, no, I'm not. I didn't even look. Do you know what I mean? And I find that that's the case often. So that's why, for me, economy of craft, less symbols when I'm first getting to know a chart is very helpful. And then in time, I'll start to add more. By transit, I use them usually immediately and often, because I find that in the other direction, traditional techniques of prediction and forecasting are sometimes far more complicated than they need to be. And I find that the outer planets are really handy in terms of doing quick delineations for forecasting. But at any rate, that's me. So I use them like fixed stars also in the chart. If they're within 3 degrees of a conjunction to any planet or sensitive degree, I consider that to be the top level of importance, and beyond that, traditional aspects within 3 degrees. That's how I work with them. Finally, do the outer planets have something to do with the development of generations, or are they generation defining, or are they defining of the zeitgeist or history or something like that? I think so. I think that's a really good understanding of the outer planets, that they are almost best used in mundane astrology and understanding big movements in the collective. I love Richard Tarnas's Cosmos and Psyche, because I think it does a really nice job of sort of laying that out. Of course, I think that the outer planets can be really valuable in natal work as well. And I've, again, no problem with their use in natal work. I always feel a little defensive when saying this, because by saying, oh, I don't use them, a lot of times I get charged with being like, oh, so you think they're useless. Well, no, just because you don't use something doesn't mean you think it's useless. Like if I don't use a certain cutting knife every day, does that mean I think it's useless? No, right? So I think we have to be a little bit more broad-minded. Like craftsmanship is personal, it's individual. And again, if we conceptualize astrology as a form of divination, where the sky is speaking to us through the symbols, and where no one planet has any more of a hold on, the mundane or the transpersonal than another, then I think it really, in some ways, it boils down to craft choices. And there's lots of intelligent debates that can be had about craft choices, but I think that's very different than the conversation about, is one set of symbols better than another? So at any rate, yes, I think the outer planets are related to the sort of vast sweeping movements in the collective. I think that's one of the best things that they can be used for. It's almost like they're the evolution of mundane astrology, the ability to predict and look at the sort of movement of history in the collective and things like that. I really like them for that reason. I think also we should remember that there are many techniques to look at mundane astrology by, eclipses, event charts, other kinds of planetary cycles. Again, I think for me, the biggest thing is that although I love the outer planets, I'm not enamored of them, and I don't think that astrology fails without them. I think that as a traditional astrologer, this is a perspective that was very liberating for me, because I found that I was placing almost too much importance on them, because every teacher out there and every website out there was like, oh, they're so important. They're so much more beyond what astrology used to be, or they're so superior, or they take you so much deeper, or whatever. Well, to me, because I've studied the traditional planets in depth for a long time now, I really don't think that the traditional 7 that came before them are inferior in any way. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. I hope that I danced around these questions with enough sensitivity, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you for more on the full moon. Take care.